welcome to Strength Chat with your host, the mad scientist of strength. Yes, that's right, myself, Chris Duffin. To my right, busy practicing his penmanship, is our mature athlete and coach.
And sports psychologist.
And sports psychologist, Dr. Rudy Rudolph. To my left, the most trolled, Brandon Sin.
That's fair.
That's right, the most trolled. We have removed the wizard of training. You are the most trolled now.
No, you can't ever remove that.
Just for today.
I'm growing the beard specifically for that, so.
Okay, alright. Well, let's skip on that.
Who trolls him the most?
You know, I trolled him pretty major recently, but...
That wasn't even that major. You trolled yourself.
I did not troll myself.
You trolled yourself by not being prepared for the seminar.
No, I am the master of preparation. So...
Are you going to introduce our esteemed guest?
I am. I was just going to, you know...
Feel weird about
either figure out giving either you a hard time or Andre a hard time today.
Well, we are going to tell the story about Andre, so lay it on me while you can.
Okay, because I came in... I rushed in this morning, breakfast in hand and everything, so I could be on time for a meeting. And then you, me, and 3 other people worked for 2 hours.
At least.
There's 5 or 6 of us working for 2 hours this morning on a project. Have it all laid out, this grand master plan for the gym. We've been planning this for quite a while because we'll get to our guest here, but we're going to clean out the gym for this seminar going this weekend. I think it's a huge opportunity to just completely revamp our operations. We've been excited about this for 3 months, thinking about it. Brady spent like 3 days this week prepping for this 2-hour meeting this morning.
So like cutting up little paper replicas of each piece of gym
equipment. Every piece of equipment, categorizing it, labeling it, color coding it.
Every piece down to each weight tree.
Yeah, then laid out on a big cardboard sheet, all to scale. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
It was great. And then someone, our creative director, picked it up and dumped it all over the floor when we were done. No. I have witnesses. In fact, my witness is today's guest. Would you like to chime in on this one, Dr. McGill? So we've got Stu McGill here today.
I witnessed the crime. Poor Andre.
Oh, no. Not poor Andre.
It's typical, Andre, is what we're trying to get to. So that's
no, I mean,
but to his fairness, he thought, at least this is his statement, that they got glued. The little pieces got glued down.
Why?
But they were not glued down.
The point of it is to not glue them down so we can move them.
Move them. We were going to meet again tomorrow to review and finalize.
Yeah, oh, here's the thing. I joked with him that he should do that earlier. He goes, no. Do you remember that? Yeah, Andre's sitting in the room, in case you guys don't know. Yeah. We were sitting at the table, and I joked with him that he should just flip it out of a little panic rage that he was having out there. And he, no. And lo and behold, he goes and did it.
Does it anyway. And we've got McGill is our witness. So
did any of you brilliant executives think about taking a picture of it before that?
You know, whatever. There might be pictures. There might be
Jesse
pictures of
did.
it. I might have one too, because I saw this going wrong, and yeah. So, goodbye, Andre.
This is a lame story. Don't come back.
No.
You know, Andre.
Oh, should we talk about the truck instead?
Andre edits all of these.
How many new dents is in Andre's truck?
All right. So let's move on with the podcast today. So we've chased off Andre officially. But
well, really quick before we go on, there's also still another inflammatory picture floating around on our Kabuki Strength Lab page that represents me with less than average calves and now knees, which I can assure you is not true.
I'm glad.
The bad thing is that there are now people commenting on there who do not realize that it's photoshopped. And to those people, I suggest you go back to school.
I think it's pretty amazing that you can hoist that much weight with the calves the size of that are shown in that picture, Brandon.
It really is amazing, isn't it?
Your knees don't crumble. Yes. All right, so welcome to Strength Chat, Dr. McGill.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris and Rudy and Brandon. It's had my tour today, and I see you've done a lot of work since I was here last, so congratulations.
Yeah, it's changed a bit. Of course, the first thing I had to do was go out and show you my toys, you know, so those of you that didn't see my Facebook post from last time McGill was in town with the two of us under my truck in downtown Portland, but this time I got them under the truck, different trucks, out in the lab, so we could I don't know. I like showing McGill my truck. So.
You know, people don't realize we have this second passion as well, and it's pulling horsepower not only out of people but out of machines as well. So I love what you do, Chris.
Some serious man toys back there for sure.
Some man toys.
So, but like we've talked before, pretty similar parallels with human performance. So in that balance, like I was showing you, like just because it's bigger doesn't mean that it's, you know, more rigid, less you know, like it's a balance. It has to be, as you add that, you've got to look at both factors and continually be balancing and refining, so that you know, the vehicle or the person can perform the way that you want. So
yeah, it's all about tuning.
Yeah.
And if you add a little horsepower, you have to shore up something else or let a little bit off. And it's the same with pulling performance from a body.
Yeah. Speaking of that, you know, pulling performance from the body. In this case, it's, I don't know if it'd be pulling performance, but back to performance is your most recent book. Since we've actually recording this one, I'll lift it up here. The Gift of Injury, which you have just finalized with my friend Brian Carroll, who's been on our podcast as well. So. I'm obviously very familiar with the story, knowing both of you, but maybe we could start a little bit about some of the contents behind the story here for our audience.
Well, I never ever thought I would write a book like this, but the long and short of it was Brian came to me as a patient with what people don't realize was quite a substantial, and I'll use the word horrific, injury. The neurosurgeons, the orthopedic surgeons had told him his athletic days were over. He'd split his sacrum front to back. L5 was majorly crushed. We show the original MRs in the book. And he came, yes, he wanted to be out of pain, but he said something very curious to me. He says, I want the next world record. And I looked at this fellow and I said, well, and you know, I knew a little bit about him, but I said, if you were my son, I would have to advise you to get out of pain and have a good life. But he said, no, I really want the next world record. Well, to make a long story short, the extensive bone damage really had to be addressed, and when you crush a vertebra and split vertebra, I'd experimented with a procedure that we called bone callousing. So you can imagine, if you break a long bone, a callus forms during the rehabilitation over that fracture, and that now becomes stronger than the original virgin bone. Mm-hmm. But vertebrae are blocks, and they have a cortical shell and this cancellous struts of bone on the inside, so to callus something like that is quite difficult. Anyway, we'd done it 2 or 3 times before, so highly experimental, and I said to Brian, well, if you want, and you really want to try this, we will try an experimental bone callousing process with you. No guarantees. But I think I can get you out of pain. But when we get you out of pain and you're still dead set on this record idea, I want you to fly back up with your wife. We'll go out to dinner with my wife and we'll talk about whether you really want to try this in your future, knowing, full aware of the risks and what's at stake. So the bone callousing was successful, and that's the first part of the book. We describe what he did, which is basically you stimulate the bone, and I know you're a metallurgist with all the metal work you do here on the various bars and devices that you tune. But it's the physics is this. Bone is a piezoelectric crystal. So remember being a kid, you could take a quartz crystal at night and rub 2 quartz crystals together and you'd see a flash of lightning go through it. So that's the release of the piezoelectric charge. Well, bone, the crystalline metallic structure of bone, is when you stress it and bend it. The region of greatest stress builds a piezoelectric charge. And the free-floating magnesium and calcium, the basic metallic ions that build bone, are attracted to that charge. So it's very clever. The bone is sucked in and laid down where the charge is the greatest. So you have to load to create the charge to adapt bone. But if you get greedy, you break the bone down rather than build it up. So it's playing with this tipping point is the whole idea of bone callousing. And it's get the charge and let 4 or 5 days of laying down bone continue. So can I just figure out? And so here's powerlifting 101 in a nutshell. If the average mature powerlifter goes for a radiology report, the report will come back sclerotic end plates of the vertebra, as if this is a condition, a medical condition. It is not. That's what powerlifters adapt. So when a powerlifter experiences load in their spine, the little small trabeculae underneath the growth plates quite often fracture, but it's a normal thing. We all do it. And as they repair, they callus and get stronger, and you build sclerotic bone. But if you get greedy and do too much load rate increases without sufficient rest breaks or just improper cycling of load and rest, the cumulative trauma, breaking and creating the microfractures, runs ahead of the callousing.
Right.
And that leads to injury. So it's the tipping point all the time. And I know you've talked about this for years. I know you practice it here at Kabuki. It's all about creating that tipping point or training capacity, whatever words we want to use. Make it as high as we possibly can in a very cleverly designed, patient, biologically justifiable way, and don't cross it. So we're always moving it up. And obviously, once in a while, we all do cross it.
We find where that edge is.
So that's the first third of the book, and then the second third is, second 2/3 is more applicable to everybody. Just how do you build that training capacity and the techniques of strength? And we talk about things that aren't often talked about, like the importance of grip strength in expressing the strength out of your body and things like that. But that's it turned into a strength manual, and we never expected that in the beginning. It was more of an injury story.
So Brian's injury occurred in lifting, or was it in
I would say it was an outside accident was the instigator. He actually fell and pile drived his spine. So no one knows, but we suspect that was the original major insult. And then Brian, being the Hercules that he is, kept on lifting. And it would callus a little bit, of course, but he kept pushing it far too much. But he did other things, and a large part of the book is talking about when you are an elite strength athlete, you have to earn the right to withstand the training volume that you do, which means, and I learned this in Russia and Poland, they were masters at conserving their bodies for 23 hours a day to earn the ability to tolerate that massive training dose in 1 hour or less.
And then build to that. That's a big people don't understand is they take this program that they've seen published that took someone to a record and go, I'm going to start and copy that, right? And yeah, I mean I think that's where this the tipping point could be a really good discussion on a number of factors, not just the spine, but overall performance as a whole. That you have to have stress to adapt and grow and live better through strength, which is our philosophy. But more is not always better. We want to push that limit, explore where those boundaries are, but never cross it. And you're discussing the point is adaptation isn't just muscle and tendon; it's also bony structures. So that's important thing to understand, that those adaptations to be able to lift a heavy load don't happen in that first year of powerlifting, right? Like, it takes time to have, tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, but like to develop that spine that can handle those heavier loads. You're not going to just like, hey, I'm making tons of progress this first 6 months of lifting, let me start pushing this big massive deadlift. I'm a new female powerlifter and I'm going to go for a 450-pound deadlift in my first year of training or something like that. You're likely to induce some sort of risk.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We'll get back to Metal Shop here once again. Obviously, over our years, we would examine cadaveric spines, and you know who donates their spine to medicine. It's old people when they die. These are very fragile spines, and they do not give a good idea of adaptation and what athletes truly are. But once in a while, you'd get a spine from a powerlifter or someone murdered in prison or something like that, who'd been a lifer and trained heavy. And as I've already described, can I see your Coke can? The spine is made up of vertebrae or blocks of bone. The top and bottom are cartilaginous end plates, but basically, let's consider this a vertebra. But inside that vertebra are struts of bone that run vertically, and they have little transverse trabeculae that hold them all together. So if that's a vertical trabeculae bearing load and that's its neighbor, they have a little strut going between them. But if the top cartilaginous end plate gets loaded, that strut starts to bend like this. Now, if you have a thin transverse trabeculae or tie rod holding it together, which is what they do, those are the first things that break when a person becomes osteoporotic, and men become osteoporotic as well through not loading enough. Those transverse struts are the ones that disappear first. But when you look at that powerlifter's spine or the strength athlete's spine, that strut got welded into a big bony gusset. So when you're welding a cantilever post, if you welded in a corner gusset, it would now take a lot of load. And so when we talk about bone density, you're actually welding in through that piezoelectric mechanism I described a few minutes ago, plates of bone, but that takes a long time. So that's what goes on and all of what we're trying to do.
Do you know how long that some of those bone adaptations take?
Yeah. Now, it's been so interesting for me to see the age of world record holders drop over the years. But if you go back 20 and 30 years ago, the grand old men and women who were setting powerlifting records were in their 40s. And that's how long it took to build that massive bone integrity that I'm talking about.
That's people that aren't in like lifting always seem to ask me, like, what, it doesn't make sense that, why are the strongest people in this like 38 to 42-year-old range when everybody, your peak is in your early 20s, and like there's a lot more to it than just peak hormonal, like the neural firing, the adaptations from bone, like all this stuff takes so long to develop. You're well past that, what in medical literature is past your prime, right? But that's where strength happens. It takes a lot of loading over time.
Yeah.
Longer to modify bone than to strengthen muscle.
Well, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But the spine, again, is such this unique structure. On one hand, we want to move, and having a flexible spine allows us to dance. But you'll notice powerlifters are lousy dancers. And the reason is the discs between the rigid bony vertebra are not ball and socket joints. They're actually strands of collagen. And powerlifters have to adapt the disc to be stiff to bear that ultimate load. So they can't be flexible. So you can do a lot of spine flexibility work, which is fine if you want to dance or swim. But you can't add supreme load-bearing ability to flexible collagen. So you have to adapt it one way or the other. You have to adapt it to be stiff, or you have to adapt it to be mobile. Neither is wrong. It's just don't mix the two.
What are your choices?
What are your choices?
What are your choices?
And that takes several years as well. To make collagen pliable and stretch and do yoga, that adaptation to mobility is actually a lot shorter than it is to stiffen. And you know, you go to a powerlifting meet and you see guys wearing Birkenstocks and sandals, and it's pretty hard for them to tie their shoes. No kidding. That's how you lift 1,000 pounds off the ground.
Chris?
Quiet over here.
When's the last time you tied a pair of shoes?
He doesn't own a pair of shoes.
He doesn't lift with shoes even, so it's
like I'm a coiled spring of performance. So like,
well,
it's just as you know, I'm gonna get down to the floor and pick up a kid's toy. That's like an 800-pound deadlift for me. I have to like work down there to get it, and then you know, and then it springs up. You may as well put.
And you probably get more of a lower back pump doing that.
That's music to my ears, because you'll notice once again the guys who are lifting the really impressive loads treat lifting the kid's toy off the ground as if it did weigh 100 pounds. And that's how they build that training capacity. They don't use it up picking up their kid's toy. They keep it for training.
Yep, you want to keep it for training. Yep.
Oh, this is it's really interesting, because a lot of lifters, especially once they hear they have a herniated disc or they have this issue or that issue, it's almost a death sentence, they think, right? Well, we're learning more about adaptation, especially of the bony structure. Like, to me, just hearing this, fracture of my vertebra sounds far more severe than a bulging disc, but it's interesting, and I think it's almost really empowering to those who are involved in strength sports to know that, yeah, your body is meant to heal itself given the right circumstances. So I think it's a really, really interesting and provoking thing to be able to understand that, you know, we will adapt to stress that is placed on us, whether that's stress from previous injuries or purely from performance.
But it's a fine line, and you had suggested this was an experimental approach with Brian. So it's a fine line between getting the right amount of stress and overloading it. So how did you approach that? You know, did you just get to a point so you were up to just doing pain-free movement, pain-free load, or did you just push beyond that, or how did you gauge it?
To get someone out of pain is a very different philosophy than training for performance. So it has to be two stages. A, you have to get out of pain, and then B, you shift into performance. If you mix the two up, you'll stay in pain and you'll never perform. So to get someone out of pain, they require a very thorough assessment of the pain mechanism. So most of the time, that is a physical mechanism. It is a combination of motion, posture, and load that triggers their pain. Now, they may have a neural overlay to that, a disc bulge trapping a certain nerve root or whatever it is, but anyway, the assessment will show you the mechanism of what's causing their pain, and you address the mechanism. When you show them how to move to avoid whatever that pain-causing mechanism and pathway is, they desensitize the pain trigger threshold, so it takes more to irritate it. They stop picking the scab, in other words, but it also allows the tissue healing or adaptation process. So it'll be a combination of mobility strategically somewhere in their body, stiffness and stability strategically somewhere in their body, etc. And then we start to, again, from here it's very specific to the person. Why did they get hurt in the first place? They got hurt in the first place because there was a stress concentration. What caused that? Was it a mobility issue? Was it a failure to have sufficient stiffness in this flexible rod of the spine that has to be stiffened to bear a load? And then we address that aspect. So now you build the foundation for future athletic endeavors. So what is that now? Is it a speed sprint? Is it an Olympic lift? You can't build for it all. You have to be quite specific to get ultimate performance. I mean, just look at powerlifting. The big deadlifters with the big ape index that we've talked about before, are rarely the big bench pressers because they have the longer arms the best deadlifters, which is the mechanical disadvantage for bench. So very rarely do you see someone win both at the same meet. It's one or the other. So there's this great specificity anatomically, biologically, etc. But know what you're building for and create the foundation for earning that training regimen that's going to be quite specific now, and off you go.
There's a couple key points here that I really want to kind of drive home, and one of those is around the capacity in preserving yourself. So you need to look at that as a whole in your training, like your choices and the tools that you use around that. And if we look at lifters, like what is one of the most major traumatic injuries that we have? It's around spine. So we want to strengthen and develop that, but at the same time we certainly want to have one of that areas that we're focused on not overloading, because we see more major injuries with lifters than anything else. And so just to kind of pimp our own stuff, I guess, but like Rudy and I walked you around the floor showing you the different tools and having you get under some of the stuff that we're doing, and you really like grasp like the theme of like what we are as a company and what we're trying to produce with like the transformer bar, the Duffalo bar, and well, some of the future projects we talked to you about as well. But I think it's an important thing for people to understand that in their training. I all too often see people, I just need that stronger, and so it's the most area that they beat up. Got to do my reverse hypers, got to do my back hypers, got to do my good mornings, got to do my, what was the one? We'll get to the questions later. The Jefferson curl. So, yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Well,
I went like 5 different directions there, but
well, that's okay. I look at car mechanics. I don't know how many there are in your country, but there must be tens of thousands. But how many can build a car that wins at Indy? 5. Right. And it's the same thing when you're building a body. You have to start by looking at the proportions. So, you take a guy like Rudy and me, and I'm all gangly limbs. I can throw a football. Mm-hmm. I'm a lousy bench presser. I'm too long.
Yep.
However, you learn your leverages. So if you have someone who's long-legged like myself, to get a high-performance squat that's knee-dominant is damn near impossible. You're going to break my knees first. Mm-hmm. But if I can get back into a good hip squat, hip-dominant, I have a chance at least to train the body type that I have. So all of these people have different advantages and disadvantages. So you start by looking at leverage and these kinds of things. But now you have to tune the equipment to, if a person is shorter in the thigh, and that's naturally going to position their upper body into a more upright, they have to have more leg strength. You get someone who's longer in the leg and shorter in the body, they're going to need more hip strength. So to put them under a transformer bar, and then again some of the monolith inventions and tweaks that you're coming up with here as well, all are assisting you in tuning that athlete to raise their training capacity and raise that tipping point. And you keep playing with technique. Rudy and I, we were workshopping stiffening the upper back and getting a better grip on the bar. Okay, so you guys have been engineering the curvature of the bar just right, and I love the bench press, by the way, for a guy with torn up shoulders. It was, I felt as though I could lift again today, and I even said, I've just to full disclosure here, I've now graduated to having hip replacement, but my hips loved getting under the transformer and just playing and tuning how much I was going to share into my knees, my back, and my hips, and you make it all comfortable. You optimize it.
That's a really cool one that a lot of people have yet to discover, just because you can change those load dynamics really easy with the adjustability of the bar. You can make it that more posterior dominant hip squat. You can start bringing it into a more quad dominant squat just by adjusting where those load and leverage points are. And, I think that's going to be like, once people start figuring that stuff out, it's going to really change like both strength training and bodybuilding as far as squatting.
It is, you know, you go back a few years ago when we didn't have all this stuff and we were arguing, oh, should we front squat or back squat? And it never quite felt right, you know, the guy with the shorter legs who wanted to front squat,
Yep.
but this was too long and he couldn't carry the bar here to front squat, so
Yeah.
what fit his upper body didn't fit his lower body, etc. But when they can do the on-the-fly adjustments that you're affording them, and that cam that you've got on the transformer bar I love as well. So you can even play with the bending torques as they're coming up out of the hole as well, which is all fabulous for, once again, getting that tipping point as high with as much training capacity underneath it as you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, without putting the joints in jeopardy. This is the idea. Yeah.
I love coming here.
Oh, we love having you here. Brendan, you had a few questions that came in from our listeners.
We got quite a few questions here for the good doc. Surprisingly, quite a few questions on upper and lower cross syndrome. Specifically, we have a college D1, looks like football coach, or maybe didn't specify, but he's asking about, he's noticing a lot of athletes with these specific posture dysfunctions coming in. What are some things that he can do to mitigate those issues within larger groups of athletes?
That's a really difficult question to answer, because in my world, when we get into postural issues, we're looking at people subject N of 1. And it's very hard to generalize postural dysfunctions to groups that way.
Yeah.
You know, you can say, all right, well, I've got a group of aging long-distance runners who, it's my mother.
Feel free to take it.
She calls at 8 o'clock every night, and it's 5 o'clock here, so I just flew in. She's right on time. Anyway, where were we?
Generalizing larger groups of athletes.
For sure. So anyway, it requires an individual assessment to get it right. But, you know, we have done some experiments over the years where hip pain and back pain shuts off the glutes. Now we're and Yonda, who came up with the crossed pelvis syndrome, which is half of the story of the question. He was right with that. So, boy, that's a postural dysfunction. It's a neurological dysfunction, and yet I've just given a mechanism that hip pain drives it, or back pain drives it. So if that's the driver, that gives you a very specific roadmap for rehabbing or correcting that person. The next person just might sit too long. Right. Or they just have a poor body image in their brain. So you can do all the physical corrective exercise you like, but movement is half physical. But the other half is the engram. It's the tape that your brain runs representing that movement. Maybe that's corrupted. Maybe they don't know that this is where they are. So you can do all the corrective exercise, turn on their glutes and all the rest of it, but if you don't reprogram that engram, and we proved that many times in our research over the years, they've got to understand the mechanism, think about it, know what it is, and that's the good coaching part of it. So coach them, know how to coach and cue muscle, and create that representation. So that's my general answer, but it's not easy for me. I wouldn't have a clue on how to do it on a group. I would have to do an individual assessment and get it right. Anyway, that's
a great answer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Probably not what he was hoping for.
I think that should give some good ideas and direction, yeah.
We got quite a few questions on disc issues, naturally. And then most of them boil down to, do discs ever heal? After the point of bulging, protrusion, do they actually heal?
Well, the answer is yes and no. From a biological sense, the answer is no. They don't heal, they change. But the practical answer is, does it inhibit future athletic endeavors? Well, I mean, as you know, I really don't mention names of athletes, but you know some of the athletes I've worked with who are now fighting in the UFC, playing in the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, and people who are setting records on the powerlifting platform.
I've herniated L4, L5, and that was when I was a 800-pound deadlifter.
Right. So my answer to that is all of those people have had disc bulges, some of them quite nasty ones. Have they healed? No. You can still see the scar on the MRI. However, they have gristled it, and they've gristled it, toughened it. It's now changed. The joint mechanics have now changed. The disc is a little bit flatter. It doesn't have the movement it once had, but with appropriate training and respect of the new biological reality, don't tell me that they can't take load and their career is over. I think they might be misguided in trying to get inappropriate mobility, insufficient stability. They've not addressed the original mechanism of why they got a disc bulge in the
That's what I was just saying. That step one is go back and figure out why you have it and try to correct that. So,
exactly. Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry about how long-winded some of these answers are, but you're asking me big questions.
Yeah. Well, there was a very intentional part in there. You said, you know, it might not heal for quote-unquote better terms, but it can continue to receive load or adapt, and I think that's a really important distinction, maybe even a paradigm shift for athletes to think about their injuries.
I'm just gonna, as a coach, like reinforce the point, and we both just said it, but for some reason I think people don't hear it sometimes, is it adapts and people focus on the rehab. You've got to go back and fix why it happened to begin with. Okay, that is just, everybody wants to focus on, here's my rehab plan, okay, in 12 weeks I'm going to be here and here. Like, you've got to go back and figure out why, what you were doing wrong, and correct that. We had either too much going past the tipping point with loading or movement mechanics, whatever it is. But, you know, fixing in the short term isn't going to do you anything.
Yeah, we cover that quite well in Gift of Injury. Maybe it was a programming error. Too heavy cycles, not enough rest. Maybe it was a technique error. The exercises they had chosen, the depths that they were going to, etc., were not matched to the anatomy of their joints. It could be something like that.
What do you mean? There's a standard depth for squats, right? Every depth's the same, right?
Yeah. It could be that they were doing things at work and then mimicking those same loads on their body in their training. And they didn't need any more of those. They needed other things. Or maybe they weren't undoing some of the stresses of the chronic loads of work or whatever it was in their life. So there's a whole host of reasons why the disc bulge, I mean, that's not normal. You know, something happened. And I mean, another mechanism that most people don't realize is most disc bulges, and I think we're fairly qualified to say this because I've created more than any other lab in the world, most often start with trabecular bone damage. So that, can I see your can again, Chris? Yep. So this is a cartilaginous end plate. If the trabecular bone damages underneath the plate, you now get a bigger stress on the cartilage end plate. That breaks what's called Sharpie's fibers, where the collagen fibers of the disc connect into the bone and they become weak. So if you keep bending and stressing, and you can go and dance and bend around all you like with no load, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when you do it under high load, the nucleus gel will pressurize and those collagen fibers start to delaminate, and slowly the nuclear gel will work through those delaminations if there's too much bending motion while you're under high load. But you know, you could do cat-camel exercises and move around on the ground with impunity. But once that delamination has occurred, now sitting for 20 minutes at the computer makes your back grumpy. And there's a lot of people there. But if they get the mechanics right and the right tuning of the original injury mechanism, you can do a lot with your back. I mean, I'll give you one more example. I think of jiu-jitsu. So people now with the rising popularity of MMA realize jiu-jitsu very much, you need mobile hips and a very mobile spine. You have to be a reptile to be a great jiu-jitsu master. Well, I've had some of the top jiu-jitsu masters as patients. And they might get up in the morning and it's law in their sport that they must place their hands flat on the floor in front of them and do that for several minutes. Well, you can do that, but you are now in so much pain for the rest of the day you can't do your jiu-jitsu session. So what we'll do is we'll dial back the heavy bends, even though it's required for the sport, but now, and just keep it for the octagon for a little while. Guess what? They're back training now, and they're building that pain-free capacity, and then slowly get back to it. But this idea, oh, you have to keep training mobility to be a jiu-jitsu master, I think we've proven that too many times now, that it's, they were failing.
It's a balance.
Thank you. It's a balance. It's a balance. It's a little bit of common sense. It's a little bit of science and biology.
Yep.
So I know you like these really generalized questions, so I'm going to give you another one. The question is, what are 3 things everyone should be doing or not doing to minimize risk of injury at the spine and surrounding musculature? I suppose it's heavily dependent on the context of the activity. Powerlifters not going to have these same 3 things they need to be doing as a cashier. However, speaking to the strength sports crowd, because I think that's what the majority of these individuals are, what are 3 things that they should be doing or not doing to minimize risk of injury around the spine?
Wow. Well, you know, the answer is it depends. It depends on the person. But it does help me when you say the strength athlete, because that means they have to bear heavy load. An assessment would tell me the answer for that particular person, for sure. Be good to your back throughout the day. That's rule number 1. And when you're training, use good technique. Now, that might mean different things to different coaches and different athletes, but generally speaking, the more spine-sparing the technique, and and I'm not talking through my hat here. We did one of the first studies on powerlifters back in the late 80s, where we measured those powerlifters who lifted closer to the world record, had less back load and higher hip load. Isn't that interesting? So the poorer ones were lifting with their backs. The better ones were getting more power from the hips and legs. So, I mean, we can argue that one if you like, but I'm not stand behind my So be good to your back throughout the day and lift well, good technique. And when they get tired, think of when they get hurt. They got tired when they got hurt and they broke form. Don't get greedy. Don't break form. Quality work, be judicious, and get good coaching. That's another one. You know, I know we all answer these questions and go home at night and go, yeah, I wish I would have said that. But good coaching is essential too.
I can tell you how many times we have several powerlifting meets here a year, and we'll watch some of the athletes that come in from outside our facility that maybe haven't gotten great coaching, and you watch them deadlift or squat, and so we're just wincing, thinking,
you just want to run over,
they're going to get hurt right now. You're just like, this is a disaster about to happen here.
I used to
do that. And they're maximum load, and it's like,
oh, not to. Crap. Yeah, but and again, while I'm thinking about it, is to get good grip strength. You know, I see trainers teaching a stay-at-home mom. Here's deadlifting, powerlifting 101, and they have this stay-at-home mom, first day in the gym, picking up 60 pounds with a reverse grip. I say, well, why are you doing that? Why don't you teach her how to grip, get a good lobster claw, crush it with her hand, and then use her fingers, teach her the competency of grip, and then lock her core in. Screw the bar down, twist it, lock in the lats. Teach them how to build a lifter's wedge. You don't teach a neophyte to do that with a reverse grip. You use a reverse grip when you're setting a world record and your hands can't take it anymore. Otherwise, you're compromising your body. So, you know, these are just things that I could rant on for one after another, but there's another one that just came into my mind. So important for strength athletes, and these days, you know, I mean, I know how you grew up, and I grew up with heavy physical work, and you had a good set of grippers on you. You look at the kids now with their computer hands, and then they want to think they're going to throw around a kettlebell and a bar with hands that, you know, so they get out the straps, they start stressing their shoulders and their backs. Man, you got to earn the straps.
Exactly.
With their computer hands.
I'm gonna call Andre. Andre, your hands.
With your little computer hands. That was something that I really wanted to get some of your thoughts on, and again, it's really from a general standpoint, but it's grip training, and I think grip strength or grip efficiency is not something that a lot of people think about when they're discussing back pain or even hip pain or shoulder pain, but it's really the thing that connects us to the load the most. So in the lifters that you've worked with, have you noticed trends with their grip training? I'm assuming the majority of lifters you see have back problems.
Everyone.
Yeah.
That's the only reason they study for backs.
Like, you don't even know them if they don't.
Is there a common theme that you see with their grip? Is it something that drastically needs to improve? Do you see that as being a major
I
fault?
can't think of an elite lifter who I've seen who I haven't discussed foot athleticism and hand athleticism with. You've got to root into the ground. You've got to get good contact with the object that you're moving. You've got to bend it, control it, command it. You better have a good set of grippers, and you better know how to grip and root the ground and transfer force through it.
That's very first place we go is right here, stabilization. Very next place is connection.
Yeah, you know,
it takes care of so many things. Like if you do those right.
Thank you.
You know, it's I'm working with this. I'll reveal something else. My son's at home right now. He tore all 3 hamstrings right off his ischial tuberosity. Oh. And I'm working with a really good doc at home right now. I'm wondering if I should mention it. Well, Larry Bell, you might have heard him in the athletic world. He's very well known. But you know, how he will work, if you tear that outside hamstring, it's almost always because your foot mechanics aren't right. You didn't distribute the load to all 3 heads of hamstrings. It starts from your foot grip. Same with sprinters, same with lifters. So anyway, there's just another, we have an articulated linkage. And if you aren't using your glutes, you're going to stress your knees. You know, if you're not using your feet, you're going to tear one of the hamstrings that will be overstressed instead of sharing the load. And we talked about tuning. If you can share the load appropriately and appropriately evenly through the body, you've built the most resilient body you can.
That's a good answer.
Yep.
I've got 2 more for you. And I'll save the last one will be a softball, and the second to last one will be slightly a little bit more challenging. Maybe not challenging, but
spit it out.
Let's hear both Stu, your and Chris's thoughts on the usage of the reverse hyper for either strengthening the spinal erectors or for injury prevention purposes.
I'll go first. So Brian Carroll and I have a 15-minute video where we discuss the reverse hyper. It's loading spinal flexion, but like one of my major issues with the reverse hyper is typically somebody that's injured their back has very poor awareness of pelvis position, and so you're going to put them on something that requires very high awareness of pelvis position, otherwise they're going to be rotating again, loading that spinal flexion, and it just requires so much coaching to be done properly. 95% of the people I see on a reverse hyper are doing damage. The machine itself isn't necessarily bad if you're actually stabilized and working that and controlling the pelvis position, but that's rarely what we see in application. So I'm not a fan of it because there's so many other ways you can get the same benefit, which a lot of them are addressed in your books on stabilization, and So that's just my personal view. I have no problem saying I am not a fan of the reverse hyper.
Do you know we have one here?
I know, and
I
I
use
tried
it as a computer stand.
I know, it's a nice computer stand. That's what we use it as. Actually, that's what they usually use that in most gyms. I swear, is that and holding your drinks and stuff like that. But that's a good use. So anyway, I'll state my stance. I've got no problem with it.
Well, it's a it depends answer yet again. I know it's built a few terrific powerlifters who swear by it. However, I've had a lot of lifters come, I'm the back guy, and that's been part of the equation. And they say, well, every time I go back on the reverse hyper because I've been told it's been good for my back rehab, I have a real setback.
They probably feel good for about 10 or 15 minutes because they're activating those stretch reflectors, and they get off of it and actually feel good.
That's true.
They have a positive feedback loop in the short term.
But it's like everything else. It requires impeccable technique. And I see people laying across, but if you can get right up on your elbows and hook in and really bend that platform and stiffen your back and ensure that the motion is driven by the hips, but that requires an enormous core awareness and core athleticism. But these are back injured people. They're not there yet.
Exactly.
So again, it may be great for people who are at their peak, and that's just the finishing touch that they need, and again, respect the biological volume. But for rehab, it's not something that I can go to. And I've heard a lot of mythology around it too, about pumping blood into the disc and whatnot.
You don't want to die.
This doesn't happen. Now, does it pump blood into the muscle? Well, yeah, it does, but so do kettlebell swings and a lot of the other things that we do.
So again, back on my original statement, a properly done reverse hyper is not a bad thing, but I rarely see it, and most people with back injuries are the ones that are going to do it completely wrong.
Bingo.
And it takes a high level of coaching, so why not go somewhere else that doesn't require that level of coaching? That's just my...
Yeah.
So, way to be diplomatic.
But you know...
Good job. Along those same lines, really quick before the last question, what are your thoughts on hanging via bands for spinal decompression as a means of maybe injury prevention, rehabilitation? Do you think hanging is something that people should be doing?
Okay, just to make sure I'm understanding 100% now, hanging what? From
upside down, say.
Oh, hanging upside down.
Yeah.
With the hips.
Right,
into a band.
Okay. Well, again, it depends. I don't think Pavel will mind me telling this story. Everyone knows who Pavel Tsatsouline is from Strength First. Pavel's dad is the American deadlift record holder. I don't know if you know that. Not too many people do. I forget what it is, men over 75 or 72 or something. When you watch
He's going to be fighting Rudy for that soon.
Yeah.
He's going down.
But you know, it's interesting. When I work with older lifters, they do decompression. They must. It's how you build load capacity in an older spine like that. When you look at old stenotic spines, so people who are having trouble walking, they are about the only population that on average traction helps. But now we get into the question, what kind of traction are we talking about? In my world, it's very precise traction. So I would have someone lay prone on a bench, and depending on where the nerve tensions are and what's causing pain, I will change the knee angle, but generally I'm able to pull and create a traction load that I'm in control of. I might put a little side wiggle in their feet just to add a little bit of motion, which certain discs will do very well with, and others, if they're unstable, it irritates the hell out of. So again, do you see how precise it has to be for the level of laxity and micro movements that are causing pain in their back? So just hanging, that may work for many people. It isn't of the level of precision in my world of bad backs where my margin of safety is this, because of the loads we deal with and how close we are to the tipping point. So I don't know if that's
a good answer.
Yeah,
really good.
Yeah.
Is it safe to say that hypermobile backs shouldn't be hanging frequently?
Well, you'll know.
You'll know once you get off of it.
You'll know, but here's the test. There's lots of little tests for micro movements. I mean, I could show you if we stood up. I would do a shear test. So, as you know, a micro movement in the knee, one of the first tests you would do is a drawer test on the knee. So you'd look at the shear across the joint. Well, I'll do that in the spine. But another nice one, just to know if that's linked to pain, is have someone lay prone on a test table, grab their feet, pull them into traction, and give them a little wiggle. If they say, oh yeah, that's, you see, traction is destabilizing to a joint. You know, to suck a shoulder in is very stabilizing. It's hard to get those painful micro movements, but if it's lax and distracted apart and then you wiggle it, that will replicate the symptoms quickly. So that's one of the ways to find out whether it is the instability through the mechanism of joint micro movements that are causing their pain. So with those people, no, those aren't the traction candidates. You need the ones, they have to have sufficient stability and stiffness first to tolerate the traction. But if they do, it could be a pretty valuable tool. But again, you see how precise, again, it is in my world, which is kind of different from
it's different, but
others.
that's definitely really, really good insight and context into who may or may not benefit from it, for sure.
But there's a test to give you the first level of which way you're going to go on that.
Well, do you guys have any more questions? I got one more, however.
Well, I think Rudy's got to step out, so.
Yeah, I'm going to have to run here pretty soon, but and we're running up against some time. But yeah, go ahead with your question.
Okay, the final one is going to be in relation to some of the events you have going on. So tell our listeners a little bit about, we had a couple questions come in on our Instagram asking about the McGill Method Conference coming up in Toronto and when the McGill Method certification will be available. Fans are waiting.
Wow, well, thanks for that. There is a company, RED Management, that is putting together the courses. I never have anything to do with the business. I'm the world's worst businessman, so I never have anything to do with the business. I just try and organize the academic material. But they wanted to put on a single session of our 3 levels of McGill courses that someone could fly into and attend. So this is the first one, and they want to make it an annual event. But I've also got instructors, Ed Cambridge, who's been with me 6 years now, and Joel Broscience, who is a very high-level master coach from London, England. And he teaches for me now. He's been working with me for 12 years. So it's the team.
We know
of
Joel,
us.
he's a great guy.
Yeah.
He was out here not too long ago.
Oh, he's a fabulous mind. He's meticulous, very clever guy. You know, I send him patients every single day in the UK, and you know, he gets them better. It's fabulous. Anyway, long story short, so it's the 3 of us teaching for 4 days, and at the end of that, they can go for the certification in the McGill method, which is a written exam plus a practical with one of their clients, and one of our staff will adjudicate. And so that's...
So who is that course for? Is it practitioners then?
It is. Now we have another level, the McGill providers, which are people who I refer patients to. They're very high-level practitioners, and you need a clinical degree to obtain that status. But for the certification, it's really for anybody who's fluent enough with material of those 3 courses and can demonstrate it. And it will be mostly trainers and coaches, and then physical therapists and chiropractors.
Excellent.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for that. I wasn't expecting that.
Oh, yeah, it's people want to know. High demand. It sounds like it's safe to say that people that do pass that will be very reputable coaches.
I'm almost embarrassed to do that. As I said, I'm the world's worst businessman, but...
Well, we're honored to have you with us again for the second time on our podcast. You're the first, I think, repeat
Yes,
podcaster. So we're very pleased to have you back again. We're looking forward to a great weekend to share with you.
Yeah, well, if I can say something as well, I love coming here. I love the philosophy. I love the commitment, and yeah, we're going to have a ball as usual. So thanks so much for having me, guys.
All right. Thanks again,
so much.
Stuart.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, well, thanks for that.
All right.